So this morning we're continuing with the series on giving, following Pastor Theo's message last Sunday. And this morning I want to read to you from the 12th chapter of Mark's Gospel, and this is verse 41. And Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few pence. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." The first thing we need to do in understanding this is to connect it to the previous verses in this chapter, because there we find Jesus doing battle, if you like, debating with the scribes and the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and they're trying to trick him, trying to pull him down and trying to find something against him. But he debates with them, and then at the end of that particular section, he says, as he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogue and the places of honour at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." There's a very interesting phrase here where it says that these scribes, they devour widows' houses. And what that meant was that they take those houses for the temple. What happened in those days was similar to what happens today. When people leave their estate as an inheritance, often they'll leave it to the church, or they might leave it to a mission or whatever. In these days it wasn't different, and some of the widows would leave their inheritance, they would leave their houses to the temple. And so the scribes were employed to go and work with widows to help them write their will and then carry out the conveyancing of the will. However, what happened was that they would often keep a lot of the money for themselves. They were greedy, they were unscrupulous, they were bad in every sense of the word. And so that's where Jesus finishes this statement before he comes to tell us about the widow. One wonders whether this poor widow that he talks about was one of those women exploited and made poor because of the greed, the hypocrisy of the church establishment, of the synagogue establishment in those days. So now Jesus moves from the court of the Gentiles into the court of the women, which was also known as the treasury. And he sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put. Around the court of the women was a number of colonnades, and along these colonnades were boxes with trumpet-like openings where people would come and put their offerings for the temple. There were 13 in all, and many of them were all marked so that you knew exactly where your money was going. And several were for the temple maintenance, but some are also free will offerings where people could give their money. And so as Jesus is sitting watching all this go on, people were coming in, bringing their money, putting in the various contained boxes, the collection boxes, through these trumpet-shaped openings. And he sat there and he watched. And Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd. The Greek word is interesting. It has the idea of watching with a discerning eye. And neither the widow nor the rest of the people had any idea that they were being watched. He was watching their actions and he was watching their motives. It's a good reminder for us this morning that he's always watching. We too are being watched. In our least conscious moments, he's watching. It's a staggering moment when you're in a place of worship and maybe for the very first time realize that Jesus really is watching. The psalmist reminded of this when he said that, you know when I sit down and when I rise. You understand my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down. You are aware of all my ways. He's watching. Let me say three things this morning about this widow and her gift. The first thing is this. It's the heart that matters. No one would possibly give the two pieces of coin that they have, the last they have, everything they have, give it away to somebody unless there was a sincere heart behind it. I remember some years ago, in fact you might remember a few weeks ago I told the story of a very special friend of ours who was Thai, and she became very close to us, and she was really part of our family. She was unofficially adopted. She was a daughter in the faith, and we had a lot to do with her over a number of years, and she died at the age of 45 from cancer, and I related this story some weeks ago. However, one time we were with her, and she took us to her family village, way out in the rural part of Thailand, across near the Cambodian border, and that we travelled there by car, and we stayed in a hotel in the city of Surin. It was another hour's drive to her rural village, and so we stayed overnight in a hotel. And anyway, the next day, as we had breakfast in the hotel, I happened to say to her, you know, Pin, what would be appropriate? What would be appropriate dress, you know, to meet your family and to go to your village? Because I asked the question because, you know, in some Asian cultures, you know, what you wear is important. I mean, you wouldn't walk around Singapore in shorts and thongs and stuff. It'd be appropriate to wear long trousers. And so, you know, you never know in Asian cultures what. And so I said to her, you know, what would be the appropriate dress? She looked at me straight in the eye and she said, Darryl, my family are not going to see what you wear. It's what's in your heart that matters. Well, I felt a bit rebuked because, I mean, I knew that. But it was absolutely true, and I've never forgotten that. It's what's in your heart that matters. It's what's in the heart that drives everything else. It's what's in the heart that drives the giver to give generously, extravagantly, over and above. Our giving is in fact a reflection of our heart. The Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." So, first of all, it's the heart that matters. Every issue is an issue of the heart. Let me move on to the second thing I would like to say, and that is, it's the cost that matters. Then one poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amounted to a fraction of a denarius. The word Mark uses to describe this widow is a word that means that she wasn't just a peasant. It means that she was a pauper. She was poverty-stricken. She was destitute. She was the poorest of the poor. 2 very small copper coins, the smallest copper coins in circulation, just a fraction of a cent. You know, real giving occurs when I give something to somebody that I really want to keep for myself. You know, periodically, Irene and I go through our wardrobes and we bundle up the clothes we haven't worn for a long time, we don't need anymore. Sometimes that's because they don't fit anymore for various reasons. And then after we've realised that and go on a diet, then we've got clothes that we need to fit. So your wardrobe keeps changing from time to time. And so what we do, we bundle up our clothes that we haven't worn for a long time, put them in plastic bags or in a box or something, and take them to St Vinny's or to Lifeline or someplace down the road, and we give them away. We give them away and it didn't hurt a bit. We didn't need to keep it for ourselves. We didn't want to keep it. We were glad to get rid of it. But that's not a gift. A gift is something we give to somebody that we really want to keep for ourselves. There is a cost. It's a beautiful story told by in the Old Testament about King David, and God told him to build an altar to the Lord, and to build it on the threshing floor of a man called Ornan. And so David decided he would build it, and Ornan, who owned the threshing floor and who was wealthy, said to David, "My lord, the king, may take whatever seems good. Look, I will give the oxen and the burnt offerings, the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I will give it all to you." "No," replied King David. "I insist on paying the full price." Now listen to this. "I will not take for the Lord what belongs to you, nor will I offer burnt offering that cost me nothing. So David paid Ornan 600 shekels of gold for the site. I will not give to the Lord something that cost me nothing. Had he given to the Lord what Ornan had offered, it was like re-gifting. He'd been gifted this and he was re-gifting it. David said, no, I'll never give to the Lord anything that costs me nothing. So cost matters. But there's one more thing that matters, and it's this. It seems to me that from this story, and from Jesus' explanation of what's going on here, that it's what we keep that matters. Let me reiterate, it's what we, it's what's in the heart that matters. Cost matters, and it's what we keep for ourselves that matters. Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more than all the others into the treasury, for they all contributed out of their surplus, but she out of her poverty has put in all she had to live on. In the Message, he writes, he puts it this way, all the others gave what they'll never miss. She gave extravagantly what she couldn't afford. She gave her all. That's what we're talking about this morning, extravagant giving. Theo was talking about hilarious giving last week. And we're continuing with this whole idea of generous, extravagant, hilarious giving to the Lord. Howard Marshall, the renowned Scottish New Testament scholar, said that what matters is not the amount that one gives, but the amount that one keeps for oneself. In conclusion, I want to say that I want to relate this story to you that comes from a veteran missionary working in Africa for many, many years. His name, Nick Ripken, and he's one of the experts on the persecuted church, and worked in Africa and in the Middle East for over 30 years as a missionary. He tells the story of how he went to one of the outlying churches in his missionary service in South Africa, and he went there with a purpose to convey to the church, the African church, that his contacts at home, his churches from where he came from, had generously given a sizable amount of money, thousands of dollars, to help in the local churches for whatever they needed. And so he went to convey this information to them. And so when he told them about this gift that they'd received, something happened in the congregation. And all of a sudden they broke out into hilarious giving. And they all decided that they wanted to give. If they've been given to, they wanted to give. It kind of reminds you that God gave us everything. He gave us his Son. And what that does is to stimulate in our hearts a response of giving. And so as a response to this giving, they decided they wanted to give. And so in typical African fashion, they danced to the front and they put their offerings on the table and they swayed and danced together in groups in a very extravagant and a very hilarious manner. They loved it. They were giving to the Lord. This was all going on, and Ripken noticed at the back of the room was an old lady. And she sat there very serious. There was so much laughter and so much joy and happiness as they gave their gifts, but this lady sat there very serious, pondering. And then towards the end of the service, she struggled forward, limping. And she struggled up to the altar at the front of the church, an old wooden-made structure. She reached into her blouse. She pulled out a handkerchief which was knotted at one end, and struggled with her knurled fingers to undo this knot. And she took out a coin and placed it hesitatingly on the altar. She went back to her seat. After the service was over, the pastor went and took the coin and looked at it, and then he went and sat with the old lady and said, to find out the story of the coin. The coin was an old British halfpenny that was removed from circulation in 1967. It had no value whatsoever. Nothing. It was valueless. But this lady thought it was her life savings, her retirement money, her superannuation. Was valueless. But it was all she had, and she gave it. They decide, well, the missionary thought to himself, well, we need to do something for her. Let's empty our pockets. Let's empty our pockets and help this poor widow woman who's given everything even though it was valueless. But the pastor of the African church stepped in and said, no, don't you cheat her out of giving everything she has to Jesus. Don't cheapen her sacrifice. She belongs to us, and we'll care for her. And we will tell the story of her sacrifice. It will live for generations in the village. The widow and her 2 copper coins gave everything. She kept nothing back. I need to tell you that I want to see that widow giving her 2 thin copper coins. I don't want to let her see me watching her, but I need to see her. I need to see her to remind me once again what real love for God is all about. Amen.